Welcome to episode 2 of Tribal Jazzman Scholar. Today's Mother's Day 2010, and in honor of Mother's Day I want to talk a little bit about human history in terms of our veneration for the feminine. Homo sapiens, our species, has been on this planet in our modern physical form for 200,000 years approximately. And beginning around 100,000 years ago, 80,000 years ago, we began to demonstrate that we had awareness of life and death. We began to bury our dead with symbolic shells and things. It was obvious that some spiritual religious beliefs were emerging. What happened for that first 100,000 years is still a mystery to me, but we don't have a lot of evidence of ritualistic behavior. And then beginning about 45,000 years ago, we started doing some very elaborate artistic work in cave painting and in sculpting. And one of the things that was sculpted throughout the world by Homo sapiens were small figurines of what looked to be a very pregnant, fertile female. Very often the breasts were enlarged and the stomach was pregnant, and giving evidence of both the nurturing qualities and the life-giving qualities of women. And these figurines appeared all over the world where Homo sapiens had migrated to. And I have a couple examples of those, just pictures. This is a very famous one called the Venus of Willendorf. And then there's a couple others. This is a more modern one, more recent. This is from the Cycladic Islands. And then this is one that's approximately 20,000 years old. And you can see the very, very artistic shape, but then there's also a very large breasts, and you can see a pregnant stomach. And so originally archaeologists, anthropologists, paleoarchaeologists about 100 years ago when these were first discovered made some very culturally biased assumptions about them, and concluding that they probably represented some sort of portable pornography for hunters as they were on their hunts away from their women, so they'd have some sort of little naked figurine to remember their women by. Clearly that's a very culturally biased way to look at those, and it's also very masculine, very male way to look at those, especially 1920s male, perhaps. Most agree now that these represent some kind of reverence for feminine life-giving abilities. I imagine that as early humans began to develop a consciousness that they were alive, that they would die, become aware of the miraculous things around them in nature, including the ability of life to be born out of animals, out of humans. I'm sure that it was very natural for them to revere the feminine, because it was a woman who could birth a child, could grow and birth a child from her body. So it's no surprise that early Neolithic people, where we really have some evidence of religious belief, Neolithic was when we settled into agriculture, beginning about 14,000 years ago. It's called the New Stone Age, Neolithic, contrasted from the Paleo, Old Lithic Stone Age. So the New Stone Age was when agriculture was discovered and people settled into towns and began to grow crops, domesticate animals. And we lived in towns and small cities with trading and elaborate networks of commerce for about 6,000 to 8,000 years before we developed weaponry and began to enslave other human beings and engaged in warfare. Apparently we had a 6,000 to 8,000 year period of real peaceful existence, and we can tell these towns were peaceful for a number of ways. We don't see any evidence of weapons. We don't see glorification of battle scenes in their art or their iconography. There's no fortifications of these towns, so they weren't attempting to defend themselves against invaders. And very interestingly, a lot of the imagery that you see painted in these in the religious shrines of these towns seem to venerate a female goddess. Also, it's important to point out that the burial sites of these towns don't show any real significant differences in wealth, so everybody seemed to be fairly equal, a very egalitarian social structure. No wealthy burials and poor burials. So here we have 6,000 to 8,000 year period immediately following a 20,000 year period where human beings were creating these, as nomadic hunters and gatherers, these beautiful sculpted figurines out of bone and ivory and stone and even clay that seem to venerate a feminine divine. Then beginning very recently, about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, at the beginning of the Bronze Age, human beings began to create weapons, began to enslave one another, and in the process built huge temples and pyramids and elaborate relics of these civilizations that have drawn both the interest of scholars and tourists, like I think of the pyramids in Egypt built by slaves. These earlier Neolithic civilizations, which were quite large and quite expansive, didn't enslave other human beings and didn't produce great artifacts of culture, monumental architecture that we would notice. So that's part of the reason that they haven't come to our attention until more recently, when we had radiocarbon dating, could really look at how early these civilizations were and how peaceful they were. They were often considered to be sort of suburbs of Mesopotamia, but they actually existed quite before any of the better-known civilizations. And all of this is relevant to us because we have taken what I call a detour into patriarchy. It's quite surprising. I showed a poster of all the presidents to my 6th grade students a couple of years ago before Barack Obama was elected, and I would always ask the students, the 6th graders, what do you notice about the presidents of the United States when you see them all face to face next to each other in a poster like that? And they would always say, well, they're old, or they have gray hair, or they're all white. They didn't say they're all men. They took it for granted. And if you think about the world religions, most of them posit the god or the deity to be male and monotheistic, one god and it's male. I attribute this to an interesting change, an artifact of culture that I'm calling the patriarchal social structure. I'm not originating that term, and I do believe our way of governing, our way of ruling is through dominance, not partnership. And but I do believe that we're at a new era. We're at a great turning, to quote David Corton or Joanna Macy. We're entering a new time where we are returning to more ancient, more intuitive forms of social structure that may be more oriented towards partnership. And it couldn't come too soon. So for Mother's Day, I just wanted to celebrate both the feminine divine and also the fact that we are all entering a new era. And so celebrating the mother is a way to celebrate the feminine principle that is so significant in our ancestry. And with that, I wish you a happy Mother's Day.